Hi guys, Stream Squire here, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Zotac GTX 1080 Ti Amp Edition. This is my first attempt at doing a full graphics card review, so if there's anything I miss or that you'd like further clarification on, please let me know in the comments. The Zotac 1080 Ti Amp Edition, which is based on NVIDIA at Pascal architecture, has 3,584 CUDA cores, 11GB of GDDR5X video memory and a 352-bit memory bus. The 1080 version of this card, for comparison, has 2,560 CUDA cores with 8GB of GDDR5X memory and a 256-bit memory bus. The core clock is 1569 MHz with a boost of 1683. Although that may sound quite low, when playing games without any overclocking, this card would boost to 1900 MHz regularly, sometimes even reaching 2000. Lastly, the memory clock speed is 11,010 MHz. To power the card, you'll need two 8-pin connectors, and it has a power consumption of 270 watts. Inside the box, you'll get two PCIe power cables, a quick install guide, and a CD which has the drivers, the Firestorm app, and a manual. In terms of design, you have a dual fan cooler with a metal backplate. The card is dual slot, so good if you're looking to pair it up with another in SLI. It also has RGB lighting, which you can adjust using the Firestorm software. For ports, you have a DVI, one HDMI 2.0B and three Display 1.4 ports. The Zotac Firestorm software that comes with the card works well and should be familiar to those of you who have used software like MSI Afterburner. You can use it to adjust the RGB lighting on the card and also do things like create a custom fan profile and also overclock the card itself. Speaking of overclocking, the results I had were a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, I could only overclock the core clock by 80 MHz before I had games and benchmarks freezing and crashing. I left the Heaven benchmark running for an hour with the 80Hz overclock and it was completely stable. As soon as I bumped it up, I would get a system crash regardless of what voltage I put it at. The memory, however, was a whole different story. I managed to get an additional 500 MHz on the memory clock, which is a pretty impressive result. In terms of how that actually affected performance, on the Firestrike Ultra benchmark I got a score of 6,792. With the overclock, this boosted my score up to 7,256, which is a decent increase. Anyway, on to the gaming performance. First up is the latest game in the Hitman franchise. Running in 4K with all settings on Ultra and FXAA, the game never dipped below 60 FPS and generally jumped around between 70 to 100. When lowering the resolution to 1440p and SMAA, the frame rate would generally stay above 100 with dips into the 80s and 90s. Next up is Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. At 4K with all settings on Ultra and SMAA ×1, the game never dipped below 70 FPS and generally sat around 90 to 100. Lowering the resolution to 1440p, it stayed above 100 FPS and mostly hovered around 120. Rise of the Tomb Raider was one of two games I played which wasn't able to maintain 60 FPS at 4K. When playing on 1440p with SMAA on, the game generally stayed at 80 to 100 FPS. When I upped the resolution to 4K, in the Soviet base, which is one of the more demanding areas, my frame rate was sitting at around 50 with drops into the 40s. If you're playing on a 4K TV with a controller, then this will still be quite playable, but on a mouse and keyboard you'll probably want to lower some settings. The Witcher 3 was the second game I played that dipped below 60 in 4K, but it did fare better than Tomb Raider. At 4K with Ultra settings and Hairworks enabled, the game averaged at about 50 to 60 FPS, which is still a great result and it was very playable. Lowering to 1440p, the card doesn't even break a sweat and the frame rate jumped up to 80 to 100 FPS. Lastly, for Star Wars Battlefront in 4K with Ultra settings and AA on FXAA high, the frame rate stayed above 70 FPS and averaged at 75 to 85. Lowering the resolution to 1440p, it would very rarely drop below 120 FPS and generally stayed between 130 to 145. In terms of heat and noise, the dual fan solution does a good job of keeping the card cool and not making too much noise. In less demanding games, the temperature was about 70 to 75 degrees, and in more intensive games like Witcher, it peaked at about 81. Even when overclocked, I don't recall seeing the card reach more than 83 degrees, which is a decent result. Regarding noise, I sit right next to my PC and I couldn't hear the graphics card at all when playing games. I muted the audio on my PC and could only very faintly hear them. When not gaming, the fans don't even come on, so you won't hear it at all. I'm honestly struggling to find any fault with this card. It can handle nearly every game in 4K at ultra settings, it's not too hot or too noisy, and is reasonably priced. There are more expensive cards out there with higher clocks and fancier coolers, but I think the Zotac is the sweet spot with price versus performance, and it can easily be overclocked to beat the performance of its more expensive rivals. And that's it from me. If you like this video, please let me know with a like and subscribe, or a dislike if you thought it was rubbish. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you on the next one.